Hey Chuck, how are you?
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks
From
for
North
joining
from
today.
Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay, I'm from nice rainy Tampa, Florida.
Actually, the western suburb. It's called Gastonia, on the banks of the South Fork River.
Nice, nice. Well, thanks for joining the podcast, Indispensable Appraisers. So let's start off with what do you think our valuation industry is winning at? What are we doing good at?
I I think one of the things that the industry is done well, and if you could use this as a measuring stick, there's a tremendous need for experienced, well-educated appraisers. And I think I had an example happen to me recently. Well, it was a few years ago. My daughter has two master's degrees, and she she initially came to me and said, "Dad, can you read my thesis?" And I picked up the thesis and I got about a page in, and I looked and I just couldn't make any sense of it at all. I said, "You have to give this to your mother. Her mother has medical background." But what dawned on me was that she's a counselor. It's a social science. All of the social sciences have grown tremendously. There is so much information out there right now, and it doesn't matter if you're in counseling or if you're in appraising. The information, the voluminous amount of material, the typical individual cannot relate to that. They need a tour guide to take them through what's going on in this market, kind of thing. So, um, in light of that, long term, I think they talk about AI and replacing people's jobs and stuff. This stuff is so complicated to the typical average person that you need a tour guide, and that's what I see appraisers as being in the future is the tour guide through this maze of uh, voluminous information. Remember when I was in college, I would write a paper and quickly run out of material. Today, you never run out of material. The internet is a fire hose. All that information coming at you, you need to be able to make sense of it. And appraisers are the type of people that if they know their markets and they're well educated, they'll tell you, okay, here's the metric you got to follow. This is what's meaningful.
Cool, cool. So when you talk about well-educated appraisers, is that maybe our greatest challenge as an industry to attract and retain these younger people, next generation?
Sure, absolutely. And boy, oh boy, if you look at the metrics coming out of I guess that would be the appraisal foundation. The decline in number of appraisers over time is discouraging. And I remember a couple of years ago, you were there. We went to the national meetings of the Appraisal Institute down in Tampa, and typically they have an opening event in the morning where there's the whole group gets together, and might have been 300 people there. And I got to tell you, you walk through that room, and if you see hair on the head, it's typically not brown. Point being is that the average age, I think you've probably seen the metrics too, is the average age is probably in the middle 60s for an MAI. And certainly that's where you want to go as it relates to education. You want to get as much of the Appraisal Institute courses as you can. I mean, I'm prejudiced because I'm from that organization, but I'm a user. When I was a chief appraiser for a bank, I was a user of appraisal services, and so having a minimum education of an MAI was certainly a good. You can tell that individual at least has a good educational background. The other part of it is being an experienced appraiser. That's something that comes over time. So
So attracting, and maybe this is another challenge. I've talked to younger appraisers that are currently appraising, and I ask, how did you get into it? Would you recommend your friends to get in the industry? Same for people that are experienced, been in the industry for years. It seems like the conclusion I've come up with, would you recommend, your friends or family or people that to get into the industry? It seems like a mixed bag. It seems like the summary is, I don't know. There's some pluses and there's some negatives. So what would you recommend if somebody was considering getting into appraising? How would you frame that?
it's funny that you say that, because actually, remember we were talking before about me going out there getting my wife a Christmas gift, and actually got her a laptop computer, and the young man that was waiting on me, and we just struck up a conversation. I was actually talking about getting in the industry because of the fact that the average age is of an MAI is in the 60s, and the opportunity that's there long term. And it's not the way that the industry is set up right now. You definitely have to pay your dues. You know, you have to apprentice for a few years, and you'd have to take all those courses, and it's a huge investment. But over time, I've been doing this for over 40 years. I'm still working, not because I have to, but because I want to. And the career itself, tremendously fulfilling on so many different levels. It was my entree into investing early on when I was initially studying for the MAI that I got into buying and selling multifamily properties. And that's one of the manifestations of this skill set that you have. You learn how to read and understand markets. And if you learn that initially, I mean, I think the application of it over a lifetime is huge. So I would not hesitate. I as it relates to getting into the industry, I mean, I know it's tough because you have to apprentice and you're not paid so much in the beginning, but the long-term rewards, like anything else, if you keep at it and keep working at it, I think it's a great career.
Great, thank you. So, last question is kind of along those lines where, if you were king, what would you do to improve our industry, to attract the younger talent? So you mentioned, the opportunity is there long term.
Mhm.
And I think that's definitely a solid opinion. How do you communicate that? How do we do better messaging, better branding about that opportunity? We can just say, hey, younger generation wants more of a quick little life hack, and they don't want the long term, pay your
You know,
dues.
I
What do you
just
think?
I was thinking about maybe the onus is not so much on us, it's on them. Could they not look out into the marketplace and see that people that have invested time and energy in this industry, that have gotten their letters and had a long career, have been very well taken care of, so to speak? I mean, it's on them to read the marketplace. I think about I have a good friend of mine that I met in an appraisal course over 40 years ago, and he's still a good friend today. And every once in a while we'll get together and we look at young people struggling to find out what career to get into, and we just sit back and say, man, we were very blessed to get into this industry. And we've both been involved in many different things. He was a chief appraiser for a bank. I was a chief appraiser for a bank. I worked for a national firm. I had my own business. I was in partnerships. It's all over the place. I've invested in real estate. Just a tremendous opportunity career. I know that one of the questions you wanted to talk about was the idea of improving the industry. And one of the things I was thinking about as it relates to people that are in the industry, I think about the lenders that are out there. And the last few years of my career, I recently retired from the bank, but was there for about 7 years and was introduced to the what do you call it, the regulatory side of the industry. And that's incredibly challenged. There's so much of appraisal work comes from the lending industry. And I think that if appraisers had a better understanding of what's going on the other side of the ledger, there's one example I did want to share with you real quick. Was when I first got to the bank, my chief report was an individual that, well, what happened was the bank had gotten so big that the examiners come in and said, guys, you have to have a chief appraiser here. The bank is too big. I think the magic number, it had passed over like 10 billion. And so I was hired by the bank, and one of the first things I had to do was my boss sent me in to talk to the board of directors and sort of justify the idea of having an appraisal department other than the feds told us to do it. So I basically used the example of British Petroleum in the Gulf, where they had that horrible environmental experience, and they had subcontracted the security, they had subcontracted the safety. And yet, when the whole issue blew up, the subcontractors were never blamed for anything. It was BP. So the lesson I was trying to imply to the board of directors was that we contract people to do this work for us. We contract appraisers, we contract review appraisers. We have all this function is contracted out, and yet we will be held responsible if there's something goes wrong. So the idea is that there needs to be more communication within the industry as it relates to, bank examiners. Remember, Jeff, we had that experience with the Society of Chief Appraisers. It was a group where, sort of a loosely formed group where informally we're a group up in northern New Jersey with about 20 review appraisers that work for different banks. We aligned ourselves with this group out of California called the Society of Chief Appraisers, and we started doing meetings. And I was always blown away by the attendance that we got. And we'd announce we're going to have these meetings, and we'd think we'd get 20 people there, and then 50 people would show up. And what it showed me was that these smaller banks are so hungry to know about how do you run an appraisal department. The federal government gives you those interagency guidelines, which is like a blueprint for running an appraisal department, but it's 45 pages and it doesn't do the nuances. And it's something where we found it a great value to get people together to talk about that and say, okay, how do we do this? How do we do that? How do we do this function? How do we do that function? So to sum it up, I'd say better communication in the industry. And the group that we have now, the FIBA group, is a great way to do that. In that we have people there. We have a commonality. We're all facing the same type of issues, and we can address those issues together and learn from one another. How do we do this?
Cool. All right, Chuck, anything else you want to talk about, or is it a wrap?
This is a wrap. I just like to mention that my hockey team is #1 in the league right now. Out of 32 teams in the NHL, New York Rangers #1 team. Let's hope that it's there at the end of the year. And what I mean by that is that there's a Stanley Cup parade in Manhattan in June. I hope you're there, Jeff. I will be there.
You invite me and I'll be there.
Okay.
Thanks, Chuck.
All right. Take care.